Please, for the love of God, let this camera finally be fixed. I have very much struggled trying to get this camera to work properly for the last two videos now. I'm hoping I got the settings right now, but I don't know, is it focusing in and out a bunch of times, or is it too dark, or is it not high quality enough? Is it blurry? Is it too bright? I don't know. I saw a comment talking about it in the last video that I did on this channel that was like, wow, this guy doesn't even care. I do care. I just got no fucking clue what I'm doing with this camera. You'd think years of YouTube you'd learn something about cameras, but I haven't. I have not. So, yeah, anyways, welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. Subscribe if you're not already and drop a like on this video. Today I'm going to talk about Blake Griffin and what team he should join. He was just recently bought out by the Detroit Pistons, which I find kind of wild being the amount of money that he makes, which means he probably turned down a whole lot of money to go join a contender. So that's definitely an interesting thing. I guess that shows where his morals are, where his values are, is that he cares more about the winning than the money. So I guess shout out to Blake Griffin for that. I don't mind players who care about money above anything else, but I do respect players more who care more about the winning. So shout out to Blake Griffin for that. So Blake was bought out by the Pistons, obviously, and Shams tweeted that right now the number one contender to sign him is the Brooklyn Nets. Now, I'm not going to talk entirely about just who's most likely to get him, or rather what team I think best fits Blake Griffin and what team he should choose above all. I'm going to go focus on basically entirely contenders, or at least teams that should be good playoff teams at the very least. So just going down the potential options, I actually think one team that wouldn't be as bad as I think most people probably act like it would be the Philadelphia 76ers. Their offense off of the bench after Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey is kind of non-existent. I mean, their next bench guys are Dwight Howard and Matisse Thybulle. So if you get Blake Griffin in there as a backup four, he plays like 20 minutes a game. He's a decent shooter, a good playmaker. Actually, I should probably go over what Blake brings to the table before actually talking about his teams, because it's worth mentioning that Blake Griffin is basically completely washed. He's averaged, I think this season his averages were like 12 points on 36% shooting. It's rough. He doesn't look like himself at all. He's not like athletic at all. His jump shot wasn't going in, and I think that's going to turn around. I think he's going to go back to being a pretty good three-point shooter, but the threes were not dropping. The playmaking was still solid, but that was pretty much the only thing that looked like the Blake Griffin of old. And his post game, which is always kind of awkward, wasn't really working. He also wasn't really going to it. He was just kind of chucking threes. They weren't going in. He was playmaking a little bit, and he didn't seem aggressive at all. Defensively, Blake Griffin does not contribute really. He can be okay at times, but that's about it. So really what you're looking at Blake Griffin is a backup four who can ideally shoot the ball pretty well, playmake as a secondary playmaker, which is nice, or even in some lineups the primary playmaker in certain moments. And then also he can be hopefully a guy who can attack closeouts and be decent in the pick and roll. We just hope that what we saw in Detroit was like an extreme version of his decline, and he can still be a pretty productive role player, or even like, I don't know, a 15 point per game guy off of the bench. As of right now, we're just going to have to wait and see on that. But yeah, that's kind of what Blake Griffin can bring. I mean, there's a possibility that he could really buy into being a defensive player and be pretty all right on that end. But I have my doubts about that. It'd be cool to see him do it, but I'm just going to take the assumption that he just remains a mediocre defender. So, floor spacer, playmaker, not horrible at attacking closeouts, and could post up on a mismatch here or there, and could be decent in the pick and roll. That's what I'm expecting Blake Griffin to be, not the incredible all-star level talent he has been in the past. But all right, let's get past that. So I just mentioned the Sixers. He could be a playmaker for them and the shooter. Brooklyn, I'm not really seeing the point of Brooklyn. What they need to use their roster spots on is defense, and Blake Griffin is not defense. So I don't know why that's like the number one rumored team. Maybe that's the team Blake wants the most, but I don't think the Nets should really want Blake that much. Like, he's probably the best free agent available, but you really should be using your extra roster spots on defensive players, not Blake Griffin. The Milwaukee Bucks. That's an interesting one if the three-point shot's going in. Blake without the three-point shot going in would be horrendous on the Bucks. And I think because they already have Bobby Portis, who's really good for them off of the bench, there's really not much need for him on that team. The Celtics, I think, would be interesting because even though Blake is not big, for the lack of size that that Celtics team has, I mean, he would kind of add size to that team, which is saying a lot. But he could be a playmaker, shooter, all that, like I said. And they kind of need secondary playmaking on that team, so I think he'd be pretty all right in that situation. The Miami Heat are another team that would be interesting because actually he could probably start on that team just because Kelly Olynyk has been really bad for the Heat this year based on what I'm seeing people on Heat Twitter say. They're not really a fan of him right now. But that's kind of getting past all of the teams that I'd consider in the contender category. The Boston Celtics, by the way, are not really in the contender category to me as they've been this year, but they've been, doing better lately. So shout out to them. Utah Jazz, they're doing fine in the depth. I don't see much need for that. The Phoenix Suns, I wouldn't mess with that formula on top of the fact that Dario Saric has been really good for them off of the bench. The Lakers are interesting because they're a team that is kind of lacking in depth, especially scoring, or not especially, at least in comparison to last year, because they still have Montrezl Harrell coming off of the bench. And I do think that Blake Griffin and Montrezl Harrell could be a little bit weird of a fit because they kind of do similar things, except Blake is more of a shooter and a playmaker, but Blake is going to have plenty of stuff in the paint as well. And they might step on each other's toes a good bit, even though there's some potential for Blake cutting to the basket and he throws a lob to Montrez or whatever. But I do think that fit could be kind of awkward. But I also don't think that'd be too bad. But at the same time, I really like Markieff Morris off of the bench for the Lakers. In fact, I honestly think that Markieff at the 4 with AD at the 5 is probably the Lakers' best starting lineup or best lineup. So yeah, I don't know where that Blake would necessarily fit on this Lakers team now that I'm thinking about it more. The Clippers. I actually really like the idea of the Clippers because they are also a team that could use a backup big man or backup power forward specifically because they don't really have one unless I'm missing a name because they lost JaMychal Green. And then they no longer have Montrezl Harrell coming off of the bench. Now it's Zubac coming off of the bench. So Blake could definitely get some minutes in the rotation where he is another thing they need, functioning as a playmaker. A stretch forward definitely doesn't hurt because they lost that with JaMychal Green. So I think that's one of the best fits, ironically, is Blake's former team, the Clippers. And in fact, if I had to pick a team that I want Blake to go to the most, it's probably the Clippers because on top of the fact that it's probably the best fit on a contender, it's also a team that I think it'd be cool to see Blake go to his former team. I just love it when players go to their former teams and things like that. But there's also the relationship with the Clippers. Blake might be a little salty about the fact that they traded him from Los Angeles to Detroit, and who could blame him? So there's a chance he's not really interested in that just because of that. But in terms of just pure fit, I think Blake Griffin has his biggest spot on the Clippers. And just in general, I'd like to see that happen. And then the last two teams, really, there's another one in the playoff category at least that I think would be cool. That's the Golden State Warriors. Him and Draymond Green together might be awkward at times, but again, this is all dependent on if Blake Griffin's jump shot is going in. If it is, it'll probably be fine. Let Draymond Green do his small ball center stuff, which he does plenty. Although that could cut off minutes for Eric Paschall. Although I'm kind of the opinion that Eric isn't really all that contributing to winning wise, that impactful. And Blake might be better for that, but Eric's younger, so maybe you want to go in the developmental role, and maybe you want to look at him as a trade chip, so you give him the minutes to make him look interesting to teams for a trade chip. So yeah, that could interrupt that. But I think that'd be cool. And then the Portland Trailblazers as well as Denver Nuggets are another couple of teams that I think would be cool. The Portland Trailblazers, their offense off of the bench, really their bench unit in general is a little lacking. It's basically Carmelo Anthony is all their off. Or they also have Rodney Hood coming off of the bench, so it's not horrible. But Blake could definitely be a facilitator off of their bench. He could probably run a good. I should have mentioned this earlier. He could probably run a good amount of small ball 5. Defensively, that would not be ideal, but in certain lineups that you're matched up against where that's not really going to kill you, you could definitely go to that. and he could definitely do that off of their bench. I think that'd be a fun team for him to go to, but if he's really looking to win a championship, then I don't think Portland is going to be the best option for him. And then the Denver Nuggets as well. Denver is pretty damn lacking in the depth department, which is kind of sad to say because they used to be one of the most deep teams in the league. So I do think Blake could just contribute in the fact that he's just another body for them. JaMychal Green has been good for them. He's sometimes starting, sometimes coming off of the bench, but for the most part coming off of the bench because they still have Paul Millsap around, although I think Paul Millsap has been pretty rough this year last I checked, or last I heard at the very least. So, yeah, that could definitely be another team that he goes to. In terms of, like, if I was going to create a top 3 teams that would be best for Blake Griffin in terms of his ability to contribute the most, I'll say, not necessarily his ability to win a championship the most. Like, if it's purely just winning a championship, go to the Lakers. But if you want to contribute to at least a good playoff team, I think the best options have to be the Boston Celtics, the Miami Heat, and the Los Angeles Clippers. Those would be my top 3 picks in no particular order. So what team should Blake Griffin sign with? One of those 3 would be my top 3 picks for him. It's seeming like he's going to go to the Brooklyn Nets. I'm honestly not sure how he's going to really contribute to that team. Like, he'll be able to play make a little bit with KD, Harden, and Durant. He can probably run a couple of lineups where he's the secondary guy to one of those guys or even the third guy to one of those guys, or 2 of those guys. But, yeah, I'm not really loving the fit in Brooklyn. I don't think that's the best option for him. But if he goes there, he goes there. I don't know, man. It's definitely weird that this happened. I was expecting Blake to just like kind of waste away his career on the Pistons for years. I guess it was the fear of that happening that led to him asking out of Detroit, asking for them to buy him out, despite the fact that it would cost him tens of millions. So more power to Blake Griffin for taking power over his career and just making sure it goes in a different direction from what he likes rather than just taking the money blindly and wasting away a couple more years that he is still an NBA level player. I'm kind of concerned that Kevin Love is doing that. Not that it's bad for Kevin Love to just take the money, but I'm kind of like, damn, I wish Kevin Love could get out of Cleveland, but that contract is holding that back from happening. Anyways, that's all I got to say about this trade. Drop a like on this video. Hopefully the camera looked good this time. Maybe it didn't. Maybe I look like an idiot for suggesting that it does. We'll find out. Sure, it'll be interesting. All right, bye.